Okay, so here we are ready to sew the collar view of the Viola blouse. First things first, I've picked a fabric with highly visible right side and wrong side so that you don't get confused. So this lighter side is the right side and the darker side is the wrong side. You can also see I've finished the edges with the overlocker as per the instructions, and you can see here how I've pivoted at that angle as I go up the edge. And you can also see how I've got all my markings on the wrong side. I have used a marker because this is a tutorial. So our first step we're going to do is the lower diagonal dart tuck. So we're going to be matching this line here to this line here. This is the same for both views, but I am going to fold it right sides together, and it's quite easy to tell that you've got it lined up because of that V lining up. And I will pin that to match. Okay, I've got my pins horizontal so they're easy to approach with the machine, and I'm going to just start at the top, back tacking, and then continue on matching the lines. Just stopping and back tacking a little circle, and that's our first dart tuck done. So that's what it looks like from the wrong side, and that's going to end up pressed down. Now we're ready to do our upper dart tuck where we're matching this line to this line. Exactly the same process. We're just going to be folding it right sides together and matching all along that line. So I'll get that ready and stitch it. Again, so I am sliding my pins along the line, keeping it matched. Oh, beautiful, look at that. And then, once I've matched it all the way along the line, I like to think about which way it's going into the machine, so I'm going to be doing it this way with the bulk on this side, and then I'll switch my pins to be horizontal, just to make that little bit of sewing much more approachable. Last one through the dot at the end and stitch. I want to encourage you not to be too perfectionistic and just be kind to yourself. I promise it'll all come out in the wash as long as you're not going way far off. Okay, so there's our upper dart tuck, our upper diagonal dart tuck sewn. And what's going to happen with these is they're both going to be pressed down towards the hem. So what I'm going to do now is tack them in place along that edge. And we're going to do that within the seam allowance of 1 centimetre. And this is all going to be hidden on the inside of the garment. So there I've got those tacked downwards nice and neat, ready for our next step. Okay, now it's time for the central dart tuck. So this bit is pretty clever, and it's going to start down here with these squares being matched as a dart tuck like we've been doing, but up here it transforms into a turn back facing for the neckline. So just trust the process and it'll all work out. So I'll show you how to do that. Just like the other dart tucks, we're going to be folding right sides together, and we'll start at the base where their squares are going to be on top of each other. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. You've got a triangle up here and a triangle here, and they're going to be on top of each other. But the tricky thing is these edges don't match at that point, so don't worry about that. I'll pin it all up and I'll show you what we're looking at when we're finished. Okay, here I've got it all pinned up with plenty of pins. So let me explain. We've got our triangle here, which is where we're going to start and stop the stitching, and that matches to this triangle on the other side. Now these edges are going to be offset from each other, and that's normal and okay, this side is going to use a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So if it helps you, you can mark in that 1 centimetre seam allowance up here and match it to the line on the back on the other side, and again all the way down to the base where we've matched these lines and matched the squares. So I'm just going to stop, I'm going to start stopping and back tacking up here, and then sew all the way down in one line, stopping and back tacking at the square. Okay, could be a little straighter if I'm honest, but I've gone a little wide on this, but I did that on the other one as well. So yeah, I could go back and just quickly scoot that in a little bit if I wanted, but again, don't be too hard on yourself, you know? Knit fabric, it's very forgiving. Okay, so now you can see that when we push this pleat out to the right, now you can see how the pleat is turning into a turn back neckline up here, and eventually this will turn down and do its own fun little thing with the turn back here. Again, I know it seems scary, just trust the process, and we'll get on to our next step now. Okay, so the footage of this step got deleted, so I'm back at a later stage to explain it, so just ignore this extra work here. Let's talk about the double-ended dart tuck. It's treated the same as the other dart tucks, but it's got a pivot in it, much like a double-ended dart. So you're just going to match this to this, this to this, and at the top, depending on what size you're making, you may find that instead of one dot, it's two dots that need to be joined up, that are a little further apart. But again, you're just going to fold it right sides together, matching these points, matching these lines, and then stitching, back tacking, going down, pivoting at this dot, and then going down to this bottom one and doing a back tack there. Okay, so I've sewn this double-ended dart tuck here. So here's what it looks like from each side, just those lines matched and on top of each other. And here's what it looks like from the wrong side. And the right side. So you can see it's opening up at the base here, and it's going to be tucked away inside the facing later on once we've got all this sorted out. But we've got a little bit more to do on the collar, on the other side of the neckline now before we move on to the collar. So this is where this side comes into play. We're going to place it right side up. Oh, it's going to get slippery. We're going to fold this back. See, we've got these two lines. We've got more lines to match, surprise, surprise. So again, we'll fold it right sides together, use the point as a guideline, and we're going to be putting these two lines on top of each other, matching them up, pinning and stitching. So I want to point out this little bit here. When this is folded, see how this little bit here goes a little bit past? That is normal and that is good. So that'll all come out in the wash when we fold it in the right place. So I will pin this and sew this now. Right, okay, oops, so we've sewn that. This is what we're looking at now, and see how that folds. We're going to fold this down, and that's, as you can see, that's working together with that established facing that we've got going on there. And now you can see that this is meant to extend up past the pleat, and this trues to the shoulder where we can secure it with tacking within the seam line as usual. So might as well do that now. pushing this tuck down towards the outer shoulder point and just securing it. A little bit of stitching. Alright, things are taking shape. Okay, we've created all of our design features on the front and we're ready to stitch the centre back, which is this, the centre back of the collars. So we just need to fold it right sides together, matching the edges of the collars like so, matching that notch in the middle and matching the other end. So again, just stitching with a 1 centimetre seam. Okay, so we've got our centre back seam of the collar now. It's starting to look like a cohesive unit now. Before we do that, we're going to make our lives a lot easier when we do that by getting these dots, there's one on each side, and transferring them to the right side. So if I spread out the collar, you'll see there's a dot here, and they're all at the inner corners. And then there's a dot here and a dot here. So take the time to transfer these to the right side so that you can see what you're doing later on. I'll show you a little tip I like to do. If I'm transferring a dot, I just thread a pin before, with the pin crossing across the dot, like so. And then when I turn it over, the gap is where the dot is, so I can just mark that with my marker of choice. So I'll do that on all 4. The other good thing about this is that the bar passes across and it makes it a little bit easier for chalk to make a defined marking because you've got that little metal bar in behind. So yeah, I will mark mine and I will get back to you. I've marked those dots on the right side, all 4 of them. And now we can fold our collar in half, wrong sides together. So starting at the notch, and again you'll have pressed this open. I haven't done this because I am just making an example, but you will press this seam open, and if you want to cut down on bulk, you can trim one of these sides in half, but I'm not going to do that, especially on thin fabric, it doesn't matter. So folding these in half, matching the centre back seams, these seam allowances will come poking out and you can trim those off. But we're going to secure this little collar sandwich in half and we're going to stitch it together within the seam allowance. So start here and just travel across to the other one. Again, within the seam allowance means it won't show when you're finished. It's just going to make things way easier to sew. Matching those centre backs and matching the raw edges with each other. You're going to want to pivot there. You don't have to worry about it being perfect, it's going to be hidden. Okay, so that's our collar sandwich made, looking good. And now if we turn it to the wrong side, you can start to see how things are shaping up. You can see how this collar edge wants to come across and match to this folded edge, so we can actually stitch those down. See how neatly that folds back at that point? So we're laying this finished edge on top of that folded edge and we'll secure them together, not through to the front, only through those layers, and that'll keep them attached. So we'll do that now. I'll just stitch on top of my overlocking, and again only catching through those layers. I don't want to go through to the outside. Right, so that's what that looks like. And the last little bit is we can see how that matches along the shoulder now with our turning back. Funny how it does that. And we can secure that as well. Oops. Don't really need to worry about back tacking those bits because they're just to hold it in place. So now we have our front unit ready to be attached to the back, which is pretty exciting. It's starting to look suspiciously like a very awesome garment. You can see this is curling up. So this is going to be folded down wrong sides together along the notch and secured through these layers, through these folded layers. You're not going to do it through all layers all the way to the front. And again, I would not do this quite yet. I would wait until you try it on and check the fit of the neckline just in case you want to take this area in or anything like that. But that'll be a final finishing step, is tacking that down within the seam allowance. So yeah, I will grab the back and we'll get to work on that. So here's a back that I prepared earlier. I've sewn the centre back seam, and what I've done is I have stopped and back tacked at the dot so that this seam is free above that dot, and that is because we're going to be doing some pivoting when we sew our collar. And you can press this open or to one side, doesn't matter. Now if you've overlocked it all the way to the top or you've stitched all the way to the top, you can back tack at the dot and clip it down so that it can open up, because that's essential when we pivot, is making sure the seam can open up. When we pivot, the inner corner needs to open up. So we're going to have to clip into this dot area to let it open up when we sew. So what I advise you to do is, if I marked in that seam allowance for you, it would be 1 centimetre here and 1 centimetre here. And you're going to want to stitch with a small stitch length just before the dot, and that's going to stop, it's going to reinforce it, so when you clip it's not super weak and it's not going to split open there. So I would mark in your seam allowance and then do a very small stitch pivoting so that you're just before the dot and working down here. So I'll show you that. So I've done my little V stitching here. It's really only, it's good for a guideline and to strengthen, and now we can clip through both layers too, but not through that dot. And you do have to be quite close to it, otherwise you're going to get puckers. So just be bold, don't be afraid, and just go for it. And you're going to want to do the same with this one, so I will do that now as well. Alright, we've got our front, we've got our back. Place your back right side up, and then grab your front and place it right side down. So you can see we're going to match the outer shoulder point here. We're going to sew along. We've got our dot marking here, which we're going to match our dot markings here. This is where we're going to be really careful about pivoting. We're going to pivot down, sew this diagonally, and this centre back seam is going to match up with this centre back seam. And then we're going to pivot again, up again, and pivot again. So because we're pivoting an open edge up here, and then we're pivoting on the back, the open edge, you may want to sew with the back on top for those parts if that makes you feel like you'll be a bit more accurate. So don't be afraid to sew the seam in several passes. But I will show you. Oh, and I haven't fused the back for this example, but your back shoulder seam should be fused if you've been following the booklet. So again, I'm laying this on here with the dots matched up, sewing right sides together. Alright, some dot on dot there is what we want to see. And when we get to the dot, we will pivot, letting that top part open up, and then our next matching point is going to be the centre back. Now if you're finding this area puckers, you may not have clipped far enough. I know it's tempting to clip a few millimeters away and hope that's enough, but you really have to be bold. Just trust. Just trust. Now I'm just lifting up the centre back here to make sure it's matching, and because I'm going to press mine open, I'm making sure that that back is pressed open. And if I find that I'm going to have trouble, I can always switch and sew with the back on top. I'm going to be bold and do it with the front on top. Let's see if it bites me in the butt. And again, pivoting one more time, matching that shoulder, matching the dot to the dot. Pivoting is one of the most tricky things to do in sewing, so if you're struggling, that is normal. It is not easy, and I find it very finicky. Then again, pivoting again, shoulder seam on the final home stretch. Okay, so that's what that looks like. And that's what the back looks like. Oh, who sewed that? Gosh, what a beautiful match. Look at that. Okay, so now we have a front and a back joined together, and you can see, how the facing and the collar are married and they're best friends. I'm just talking nonsense now, honestly. And here's the facing, and of course this is designed to be turned towards the inside, like so. And there you have it. So if I was to tack this down once I made my fit check, it's just turning it down along the notch, opening it out, so I'm only sewing through these two layers. I don't need to sew anything through to the right side of the garment. You don't have to go right up to the seam, I'm just doing mine 5mm from the edge. And that's just going to tack that in place so it doesn't flap up. And there you have it.